Hello and welcome to the briefing on Module 3 readings. This is Part 1, Chapter 3, Customer Expectations of Service. There are three aspects we're going to discuss in this briefing, and you'll find in our readings in Chapter 3. Service expectations, factors that influence customer expectations of service, issues involving customer service expectations. This relates to decisions firms need to make in terms of what level of quality of service that is offered to the customer. A lot of it depends on their competitors. A lot of it depends on what are the expectations customers have, and how do customers arrive at certain expectations of service. As we can see in Figure 3.1, there's a range of possibilities. A high level of customer expectations versus a low level. Obviously, we would all love the ideal, to meet our ideal when we receive services. We want our desires fulfilled. For example, a high level of service and an ideal expectation would be something akin to this. Everyone says this restaurant is as good as the one in France, and I want to go somewhere very special. That would be an ideal expectation of service quality. But on the other hand, we recognize we don't often get that ideal. And in absence of the ideal, there is a minimum tolerable expectation. And maybe it's related to how much we're willing to pay for the service. Sometimes if we pay less, we may expect less service. For example, we may expect better service at shopping at a place like Whole Foods as compared to Walmart, for example. Then there may be somewhere in the middle. So what level is your firm? Are you at a high level of meeting customer expectations, or at a low level? And where should you be? As we can see, though, there's a range from desired service and adequate service. And how broad is that range depends on a number of factors. It also can relate to the particular element of service you're offering. The gap between desired service and adequate service is known as the zone of tolerance. If you're at the top level, you're delighting customers. The degree to which you move up the zone of tolerance toward delighting a customer, you're offering desirables. But the bottom line is a must offer. If you're not absolutely offering something at this bottom line level, then you're not delivering adequate service. So there's things you must offer in order to stay in the game in that particular service you're offering. But then as you add on top of that, layer more desirables, you eventually reach a point where you delight your customers. So it depends on what aspect of service we're talking about. This zone of expectations can be wide or narrow. It could vary over time. It could vary among individuals. For example, let's say you start adding more layers of desirables on top of adequate service. If you layer some and customers get used to that, does that mean you may have to offer still more in order to continue satisfying customers? This is why it might vary over time, and it also depends on the type of product and service. This graph in Figure 4 shows that depending on what element of service we're talking about, there could be different levels of expectation and different widths, if you will, in the zone of tolerance between adequate and desired service. Now, how do we come to determine what is the desired level of service? It's based on personal needs, personal service philosophy, and derived service expectations. Where do we get the bottom line from? It depends on situational factors, what competition might be out there, and also predicting what type of service you're going to get, and that could be through advertising. Reminds me of I recently changed dry cleaners. I felt like I wasn't getting desirable service because there were times when my order was late. It also seemed rather expensive, and I knew there were alternatives, so I changed to a different service. So it depends on the situation, what competition is out there, but also what is advertised. And when you look at predicted services and advertisements, you can have explicit or implicit service promises, but you can also have your own past experience to rely upon and what you hear from others. Here's an example of an explicit promise. This is a guarantee in writing. But not all service offerings have explicit guarantees. Some of them are implicit and implied by the advertising, for example. But now you have to think about what level are you going to be at. Are you going to delight customers, or are you going to provide a minimum? For example, to use the Whole Foods example, or maybe even Publix, as one of you mentioned in the discussion forum. You get good service, you get people who volunteer to take your cart out to the car. But then on the other hand, if you go to a Costco or a Sam's Club, no one's going to volunteer to take your cart out to the car. In fact, you won't even get bags to box the items that you purchase. You have to find boxes. The same goes with a place like Aldi. You can't just grab a cart. You got to put a quarter in to take the cart, and there's no shopping bags. You have to buy them or provide your own. But that depends on how much you're willing to pay for that service. So questions that you have to ask yourself. What if a customer asks you for services that are unrealistic based upon what's being offered and what's being paid for? Should you always try to delight the customer? Maybe, maybe not. Should you try to exceed customers' service expectations? What if you start adding more to an adequate level of service? Does that lead to a cycle where customers keep demanding more over time? On the other hand, the flip side to that coin is if you do add more, it does, evidence suggests that it does lead to ongoing loyalty, customer loyalty. And also, how do you stay ahead of the competition? You tried to add more service, your competition may add more service, and it reinforces each other. So these are some of the main themes in Chapter 3 about customer expectations. Next part of the briefing will be Chapter 4 about service quality. And I hope to see you in that briefing, and I'll see you in the discussion threads in Module 3.